is the account of the families of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the three sons of Noah. Many children were born to them after the great flood. The descendants of Japheth were Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. The descendants of Gomer were Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. The descendants of Javan were Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Rodanim. Their descendants became the seafaring peoples that spread out to various lands, each identified by its own language, clan, and national identity. The descendants of Ham were Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. The descendants of Cush were Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Rama, and Sabteka. The descendants of Rama were Sheba and Dedan. Cush was also the ancestor of Nimrod, who was the first heroic warrior on earth. Since he was the greatest hunter in the world, his name became proverbial. People would say, "This man is like Nimrod, the greatest hunter in the world." He built his kingdom in the land of Babylonia, with the cities of Babylon, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh. From there, he expanded his territory to Assyria, building the cities of Nineveh, Rehoboth-ir, Calah, and Resen, the great city located between Nineveh and Calah. Mizraim was the ancestor of the Ludites, Anamites, Lehabites, Naphtuhites, Pathrusites, Casluhites, and the Caphtorites, from whom the Philistines came. Canaan's oldest son was Sidon, the ancestor of the Sidonians. Canaan was also the ancestor of the Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites, Girgashites, Hivites, Archites, Sinites, Arvadites, Zemarites, and Hamathites. The Canaanite clans eventually spread out, and the territory of Canaan extended from Sidon in the north to Gerar and Gaza in the south, and east as far as Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim near Lasha. These were the descendants of Ham, identified by clan, language, territory, and national identity. Sons were also born to Shem, the older brother of Japheth. Shem was the ancestor of all the descendants of Eber. The descendants of Shem were Elam, Ashur, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. The descendants of Aram were Uz, Hul, Gether, and Mash. Arphaxad was the father of Shelah, and Shelah was the father of Eber. Eber had two sons. The first was named Peleg, which means division, for during his lifetime the people of the world were divided into different language groups. His brother's name was Joktan. Joktan was the ancestor of Almodad, Sheleph, Hazarmaveth, Jerah, Hadaram, Uzal, Dikla, Obal, Abimael, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Jobab. All these were descendants of Joktan. The territory they occupied extended from Mesha all the way to Sephar in the eastern mountains. These were the descendants of Shem, identified by clan, language, territory, and national identity. These are the clans that descended from Noah's sons, arranged by nation according to their lines of descent. All the nations of the earth descended from these clans after the Great Flood.
Hey everyone, and welcome to a deep dive that's, well, tailor-made just for you. You wanted to crack open Genesis chapter 10, and let me tell you, this isn't just some dusty old family tree. We're talking about ancient lineages that have sparked debates and interpretations for centuries. Get ready to see how the ancient world saw itself taking shape, because it's all connected.
It's exciting to be here. This chapter is a launch pad for so much, religiously and historically.
So imagine, post-flood, fresh start, we've got Noah and his sons Shem, Ham, Japheth, the big names everyone knows. But then Genesis 10 goes into overdrive. It's like, bam, here's a meticulous record of their descendants, but it's less like a family reunion, more like the foundation of nations.
And the way it's written is deliberate. Each son's line is like its own mini history, showing how the ancient Hebrews saw the world branching out from these three patriarchs.
It's a bold statement about civilizations, how they began, who's related to who, but why go to all this trouble? It's more than just genealogy, right? What's the deeper meaning here?
It's worldview building. Remember, this is long before our modern ideas of countries and nations. Genesis 10, it's the ancient Hebrews explaining where everyone came from, how they're related, and how they all fit together, especially in relation to the Israelites.
Okay, now my curiosity is really piqued. How did they connect ancestry to a person's identity?
The text keeps coming back to three big things: language, the land they lived on, and this idea of national identity all intertwined. Basically, your family line determined what you spoke, where you belonged, even your role in the grand scheme of things.
National identity way back then, that's kind of mind-blowing. Was this unique to the Hebrews, or did other cultures at the time think like this?
Oh, other cultures had their own origin stories, but this linking of language, land, and ancestry, that's distinctly Hebrew perspective. It echoes throughout the Old Testament.
Okay, so we've got the 30,000-foot view. Time to zoom in. Japheth's line comes first, and man, did he have kids. Gomer, Magog, Javan. These names, they sound like they're straight out of fantasy, but also strangely familiar. Who are these descendants?
You hit the nail on the head with that familiar feeling. A lot of Japheth's descendants, we can actually line them up with people and places from later history.
Right.
Take Javan, for example. He's linked to the Ionians, the ancient Greeks, known for seafaring, right? Well, guess what the text emphasizes? Their skill on the seas. It's like these ancient stories are trying to connect with the world as they knew it.
Like piecing together a historical puzzle. I love it. And speaking of fascinating figures, we can't forget about Ham and his line. The name Nimrod still carries weight even today.
Now, Nimrod, that's where we go from simple genealogy into something much deeper. He's a mighty hunter, builds huge cities, Babylon being the most famous. But this isn't just about who Nimrod was. It's what he represents: ambition, the human desire for power, the emergence of civilization after the flood.
It's like the author is using these figures, like Nimrod and his grand cities, to explain the origins of the world as they knew it, making these direct connections between biblical figures and actual empires and civilizations,
World building on an epic scale. And get this, the Philistines, those rivals of the Israelites, they're linked to Mizraim, one of Ham's sons. And guess what? Archaeology actually backs this up. It's like the text is grounding itself in reality while also setting up a much larger narrative.
The layers just keep coming. So following that logic, where does Shem's line, the one leading to the Hebrews, fit into this grand narrative?
Now that's where things get even more interesting. But we'll dive into that right after this.
And we're back, ready to explore Shem's line. Now, if I'm getting this right, he's the ancestor of the Hebrews, which puts his descendants front and center in this story, wouldn't you say?
You got it. It's like the text is carefully building a family history that leads right up to the Israelites. And speaking of important names, within Shem's line, there's one that stands out: Eber. Does that sound familiar?
Eber.
Eber. Hold on. That's where we get the word Hebrew. It's like tracing a word back to its origin.
Bingo. The text is saying, hey, it all goes back to this guy, Eber. From him comes the entire lineage of the Hebrew people. That shared heritage,
Okay, but
that
Genesis
connection,
10,
it's key
it's
to their
supposed to be
identity.
about the origins of all nations,
Yeah.
right? So why this focus on Shem and the Hebrews? It's not like they're the only ones mentioned.
Good point. And that's where the text walks this really interesting line. It's trying to account for everybody, the whole of humanity, because remember, it all goes back to Noah, ultimately, but it's also zooming in on this one specific line that leads to the Israelites. Universal origin story and specific family history all at once. AC, it's like saying we're all part of this big, messy human family tree, but here's where we come in.
That
This
we
is
is
our
crucial.
branch of the story.
Remember, this is written from the perspective of the ancient Hebrews, who believed they were chosen by God for a special purpose. And this chapter, it sets the stage for that whole idea by highlighting their unique place in this grand story of humanity.
This one chapter is doing so much. Genealogy, history, even theology, it's all here. We've got big players like Nimrod with their cities and ambition, but then we also get these little details about less prominent descendants, almost like footnotes in a history book. What's up with them? Are those names just there to flesh out the family tree,
That's
or
a
is there
question that
something more
gets to
to
the heart
it?
of this chapter. It's easy to skim those unfamiliar names, but
Mhm.
the fact that they're included at all, that says something. It's like the author saying, every single lineage, every descendant matters. They all play a part in the big picture of human history, even if we don't know their whole story.
A good reminder that history isn't just about kings and queens and big battles. It's about all the individuals, their everyday lives, the stories that are often forgotten.
Exactly.
They all
And it
contribute
reminds us
to
that
who
we're
we
only
are.
getting a glimpse of the whole picture. Imagine the stories behind those names we gloss over. It's humbling, isn't it?
It really is. Okay, so we've talked about these fascinating figures, but Genesis 10 also mentions places, cities, Babylon, Erech, Akkad. So were these real places
That's a
or
question
more
that has
like
puzzled
mythical
scholars for
locations?
ages. And the truth is, it's kind of both. Some, like Babylon, are undeniably real. We've got archaeology, historical records confirming their existence. Babylon was huge in the ancient world, known for its grandeur, and, well, its eventual downfall, too.
Wow, it's amazing to think that those places, names on a page, they were living, breathing cities, just like the ones we live in now. It makes the
Bridging
past
that
feel so
gap
much
across
more.
time, that's the power of a text like Genesis 10. It's not just some abstract story. It's anchored in the reality of that world, even if some parts remain a bit mysterious.
So it's okay to acknowledge those
Absolutely. In fact,
mysteries, the
I'd say
stuff
it's
we don't
crucial.
know for sure.
Keeps us humble, reminds us we don't have all the answers. And who knows, maybe some future discovery will shine a light on those mysteries.
Now that's an exciting thought. History, it's never truly finished, is it?
Exactly.
There's always more to
Speaking of
learn, more to
uncovering
discover.
things, there's one more fascinating aspect of Genesis 10 we should talk about. This idea of a divided world.
You mean that whole Tower of Babel vibe that hangs over this chapter? I'm ready to tackle that mystery. All right, back for the home stretch of our Genesis chapter 10 deep dive. We've gone through this amazing family tree, met some big personalities like Nimrod, and seen how this text connects to actual history. But there's this undercurrent, this sense of a world divided, people scattered, languages confused.
You're
It's
dead
got to
on
be a
about
key
that
part of the
division.
puzzle, right?
It's subtle, but it's woven throughout this whole chapter. You remember Peleg, one of Shem's descendants?
The one whose name means division. Yeah, I remember
Exactly.
thinking, okay,
And
that's
then
not
the
very
text
subtle, is
actually
it?
says, during his time, the earth was divided. I mean, come on, it's hard not to think of the Tower of Babel, even though they don't mention it directly.
Right, it's like that story's hovering over everything, even if it's unsaid. But why is this idea of
Well, on
division
one
so
level, it
important here?
explains why
What's
we
the
have all these
deeper
different
meaning?
languages, different cultures, but it also hints at something bigger. The consequences when humans get too ambitious, when we mess up our relationship with the divine. The Tower of Babel, it's all about trying to reach heaven on our own terms, to become powerful without God, right?
And let's just
Understatement.
say that
Confusion,
didn't pan out too
separation,
well
people
for them.
scattered all over. And Genesis 10, it becomes like a map of that scattering. It shows how these different groups formed and spread out after that event.
So we're not just looking at a family tree. It's like
Yeah.
the aftermath of the Tower of Babel playing out. It's saying this is how we got from one family to a world
And that
divided
leads
by
to a question
language, by
that's as relevant
culture, by
today as it was
geography.
back then. How will we live in a world so diverse? How do we deal with cultural differences, language barriers? These are challenges built into the human experience, and the Tower of Babel, it illustrates that perfectly.
It's amazing how relevant an ancient text can be. I mean, we're more globalized than ever, but
It's a
those
paradox, right?
divisions
More
often
connected,
feel
right, yet
stronger, not
more aware
weaker.
of our differences. But that's why Genesis 10 is so important. Amidst all that diversity, there's a fundamental unity. We all come from Noah. We're all on the same family tree, as messy as it might be.
It reminds us that as different as we are, we're part of something larger. It's like the text is saying, yeah, the world's divided, but it didn't start that
Perfectly
way. And
said.
who knows?
And
Maybe
that's
it
the
doesn't have to
enduring
stay that
message
way
of
either.
Genesis 10. It wrestles with these big questions of identity, belonging, what it means to be human. It acknowledges the division, but it holds on to hope for unity. It's a text that encourages us to embrace complexity, remember our shared humanity.
I'm blown away by how much we got out of just one chapter. Ancient stories,
It really
still
is.
speaking to
Shows you
us
the human
thousands of years
experience, the
later. It's
good, the
incredible.
bad.
Yeah.
It goes beyond time and place.
Couldn't agree more. Well, I'd say we did a deep dive worthy of the name today. Genealogy, key figures, historical
And we just
context,
scratched the
those
surface.
big themes that still
For anyone who
resonate.
wants to go further, there's a ton of scholarship and interpretation out there.
That's what this is all about. Not just giving information, but sparking that curiosity, encouraging you to keep exploring. So if anything we talked about got you thinking, don't stop now.
Exactly.
Grab
And
Genesis
on that
10,
note,
read it
our
again,
journey
see
through
what you
Genesis
find.
10 comes to an end. For now.
Thanks for joining us for this incredible deep dive. Until next time, keep those minds engaged, keep asking questions, and most importantly, keep exploring.